Well, today I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to Professor Sir Colin Humphreys. Colin has just completed his 6-year term as President of Christians in Science. And as Chairman of Christians in Science for 5 of those 6 years, I just wanted to start by saying, Colin, how grateful we are for all the encouragement and support that you've given Christians in Science over these years. It's been a privilege to have you as our President. Colin is a very distinguished scientist. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society and of the Royal Academy of Engineering. He was awarded the CBE in 2003 and knighted in 2010. He's currently Professor of Materials Science at Queen Mary's College London, having recently moved there from the Department of Materials Science at Cambridge University, where he was Director of Research. He has also recently spun out a company called Paragraf to try to make graphene useful for electronic devices. And I think we might hear a little more of that in a moment. But Colin has also made major contributions in illuminating the relationship between science and the Christian faith. And he's used his science to investigate some of the events in the Bible. So it really is a great privilege to talk with him today. And I'd like to begin, Colin, by asking you, how did you get into science in the first place? And how did your career then develop?
Well, Andrew, I got into science when I was 8 years old, I guess, when my parents, for my birthday, took me to London on a visit to London when I was 8. And we were walking down the Strand and we passed a shop called Watkins and Doncaster's. And in this shop window, there were the most amazing butterflies and moths, not ones from England, but from all over the world. So there were blue morpho butterflies with iridescent wings. There were moths from Africa, tropical jungles. And I was just mesmerized by this. Some of the moths had a wingspan of 50 centimeters, 12 inches. Attacus atlas, it was called, huge moth. And so I dragged my parents into this shop, and I think they followed because, it was my birthday. And so I went into this shop, and this really nice man came up and said, "Can I help you?" And I remember saying, "It's my birthday, and I want to see more of this wonderful shop." So he showed me these butterflies and moths. Then he showed me some of the eggs and the chrysalises and so on. And I noticed some were on sale. And the chrysalises were a bit expensive, but the eggs were quite cheap. So I said to my parents, "Can we buy some eggs? And I'll take them home and hatch them out." And this man was really helpful. And he said, "Do you want tropical eggs?" And I said, yes, some of these wonderful moths. And so I think it was Indian moon moth eggs, which he gave me. And it's a lovely green moth with huge tails. And he said, "Here's a leaflet, we'll tell you how to hatch them." And he said, in India, they live on a certain plant, but in England, they'll live on the leaves of apple trees. "Do you have an apple tree in your garden?" I said, yes, we do. And so he went home and took these home. And then I looked at this leaflet. You had to reproduce a tropical jungle sort of atmosphere. So we got a box. And I remember putting a piece of cardboard in the middle of this box and having a light bulb underneath. My father connected that to the mains. On top of the piece of cardboard, I put some blotting paper and then some water and then the eggs and some apple leaves. And it must have been a huge fire hazard because, we left this on for 3 days and 3 nights, I remember. And then these eggs hatched and they started little caterpillars at the apple leaves. And I hatched these things and all done indoors. And I cut branches off, small branches off the apple tree and put them in milk bottles. And the caterpillars would be just, on this in our living room. And they got into chrysalises and hatched out and they flew around the room. And that's how I really got into this. And every year for about the next 6 years, I got eggs from Watkins and Doncaster and, found plants which corresponded to their native plants in the same sort of family. So that's how I got into science. I was fascinated by it.
Wow.
And then you asked me how I did.
It does remind me because I started very early with a chemistry set when I was, about 11 or 12. And right. I think scientists do tend to start young. But anyway, how did your career develop, Colin?
So at grammar school, at O-level, I passed 11 plus, went to a state grammar school. At sort of O-levels, I wanted to take biology as my best subject, but you couldn't take maths, physics, chemistry, and biology for O-levels in the school I was in. And I had to drop one of them. And so I thought, well, I'll drop biology because I can come back to that later. but I didn't, So I did maths, physics, chemistry for A levels and dropped biology, but had this great interest in biology. I then went to Imperial College in London. I was from a fairly poor family, so I had a state scholarship there, and got a degree in physics. I did a PhD in physics in Cambridge in the Cavendish Laboratory. I went into Oxford as a postdoc. I've been an academic nomad. I've traveled around. Went to Oxford as a postdoc, became a lecturer in Oxford, junior research fellow at Jesus College, Oxford. I then went straight to a professorship at Liverpool. I remember going to the interview and thinking, I got no hope of this job. I'll give some outrageous interview. So I gave these outrageous answers to questions about, the future of the Liverpool department. And they appointed me that same day. And registrar phoned me up. I was staying in a hotel, Britannia Hotel in Liverpool, and he phoned me up and he said, come down to the bar in the hotel you're staying in. I've got a drink for you. So I went down to the bar. This is the 6 o'clock, the afternoon interview, and he had 2 gins and tonics there, and he said, congratulations. So I got this professorship at Liverpool and head of department as well of materials engineering. I then, after 5 years there, which I enjoyed very much, came to Cambridge as what was called Goldsmiths Professor of Material Science in the Material Science Department. After 1 year, I was head of department there. I then couldn't easily continue my research at Cambridge because they had this ageist retirement policy. So I slipped through this a few times, but then I was about to retire, and someone told Queen Mary University in London that I was retiring from Cambridge. And I got phoned up by got phoned up by the principal secretary, who said, come and visit us and would like to chat to you. And they offered me a job there. So I'm now a professor of material science at Queen Mary University, sort of continuing research, which is very good.
Well, you certainly had a very long career in science. What are some of the discoveries? I mean, you've been involved in a lot of things. You might like just to briefly describe some of the areas and tell us what are the discoveries that have brought you most satisfaction in your scientific career and why?
Right. So I think probably 3 things. One is LEDs. We all have LED light bulbs in our houses now. And I got into this, and all the white LEDs you can see and all the blue LEDs, they're made from a material called indium gallium nitride. It's a mixture of these 3 elements that emits the brilliant light. And there was a puzzle to start with LEDs, and that is they emit brilliant light, yet the material is terrible. It's full of defects, and the defects should quench the light emission, and they don't. And so that was a puzzle. And after about 5 years, people thought they understood why. So everyone after 5 years thought they know, okay, we know now why gallium nitride does emit brilliant light, even though it's full of defects. And I had an extremely good research student who came to me one day, and he said, Colin, he said, I've just been using the electron microscope. And he said, if you turn the beam current down and look at the first few frames, then, this theory that other people have is just wrong. It can't be right. And so I looked at his results, and we went to this conference in Japan, about 1,000 people there, and, stood up and said, we believe basically this standard theory. Everyone believes in hundreds of papers published on this. We think it's wrong. We think this is the right theory. And there was a stunned silence at the end of the talk, and then everyone chatted about it in tea breaks and coffee breaks, and people gradually came around to our way of thinking. So it was very satisfying. I mean, it was this brilliant research student I had who did this work, but that was very, very satisfying to give the correct explanation. And then with LEDs again, if you go back to about 2010, it's hard to remember this, but they were very expensive. A 60-watt replacement LED was about £50 then. And I know Buckingham Palace had them because Prince Philip liked them, but they could afford them, but average householder couldn't. And so we found a way of making them much cheaper. They were expensive because they're made on small pieces of sapphire. We made them much more cheaply, and that was one factor in bringing the cost down. And so now you get them for about £3, and they save huge amounts of energy. So if all the world goes to this, and that's what's happening, they'll save 15% of global electricity and 15% of carbon emissions from power stations, if that's from fossil fuel. So that's the second thing, which is good. And then the third thing you said right at the start is graphene. So graphene was discovered, as it were, in 2004 by 2 Manchester scientists who got the Nobel Prize. huge amount of hype, computers 100 times faster, sensors 100 times more sensitive. It hasn't happened because it's very hard to scale up small flakes of graphene, is what they discovered, to a large graphene sheets you need to make electronic devices. So I had a very bright postdoc, and he found a way of doing this. He did it with £10,000. I managed to get him from another grant. And, other people have spent literally billions of pounds and dollars on trying to do this. So that's something that we've done quite recently and set up this company. And we'll see if we can now make, very fast computers. But we've solved a major problem in doing that. So it's all very satisfying, Andrew, yes.
Yeah, that must be really exciting. And of course, the many uses for such things, it's just going to be amazing, isn't it, if it all works out?
Well, it is, Andrew. I mean, in principle, and we're thinking about this, you could make a detector for COVID, a quick test for COVID, which would do in 10 minutes results, because it's just such a sensitive material. It's hard to use, but the sensitivity is there. So, yeah, remarkable possibilities.
Very exciting. Now, Colin, you're a Christian, and actually being a committed Christian in the scientific world is a relative rarity. Would you like to tell us how you became a Christian in the first place, and how being a Christian has affected your scientific career?
Right. So it's just a slightly long story becoming a Christian in the first place, or the first bit short. So I was born in a Christian family. So my parents were Christians. My father led the junior Sunday school. I went to church 3 times a day, morning, then Sunday school evening. And my father and my parents were young Earth creationists. And so I was a young Earth creationist. And in biology at school, I'd argue with the teacher, and I'd often win the arguments. I'd say, where are the intermediate fossils? And he'd say, Archaeopteryx. I say, no, it's a bird. Where are the intermediate fossils? And so, and the class loved this. So it was good. And then I got into the 6th form in school, and in physics, learned about radioactive carbon and radioactive potassium and dating. And it's clear to me the world couldn't be young. I mean, it just had to be old. And because the half-lives are pretty clear and everything with these radioactive atoms. And so in the 6th form, it gave me serious doubts. And the problem with creationists, who I greatly respect, in fact, my parents were wonderful people, they focus so much on this. And their argument is, if the first chapter of Genesis is wrong, the whole Bible you can't trust. And so having shown that their interpretation of the first chapter of Genesis is wrong, I thought, I can't trust the whole Bible. And so in the 6th form, I had these doubts. And I thought, I haven't got time to resolve these doubts now because I've got to do my A-levels. But when I get to university, I'll sort of look through this. And so I really stopped being a Christian and went to university. And by chance, as it were, I was in Imperial College London, and I was living in a house with 2 other students, both of whom were Christians. One was a medic and one was a pharmacist. Of course, I'd never seen them before. And they went to church. So I wouldn't go to church, but they went. So I went to the church with them, Baptist church. And I kept going because the girls were quite attractive there. So I thought, I'll keep going. I'll pretend to be a Christian and that would be good. And the minister was a wonderful minister who had the students back to his house after the evening service. And we chatted there, and then we went out to our own houses. And as I was walking away from his house with someone I didn't know really, another student, he suddenly turned to me, and this has never happened to me before. He said to me, Colin, you're a Christian. Tell me how to become a Christian. And so I was walking there, by Chiswick flyover, and I thought, what do I say? I thought, if I say, I can tell you how to become a Christian because I say, so ABC, accept, believe, and commit. And I can tell you this, but I won't have any enthusiasm about it, or I can tell him I'm not a Christian, but I really shouldn't destroy his possible faith. So I just said, I copped out in a way, and I said, look, why don't you tell the minister tomorrow and go see him? And he actually did do this. That was excellent. And he became a Christian. But that night I went back and I thought, I just cannot sit on the fence anymore. And I decided to become a Christian, but what happened was I thought, not now, later. I thought I had such a good time now. When I'm middle-aged, I'll become a Christian. And then, about that next week, I think God was saying to me, you can't do this, Colin. If you believe it's true, then you just have to commit. And so that's when I really committed, but it was because of this incident, near the Chiswick flyover. So that's how I became a Christian, really.
And how has it affected the way you pursue science? Do you think it's influenced your career?
Well, look, right, it's a very good question. And it's taken me time to do this, but I think if you're a Christian or a scientist, then you really, you don't separate them. And so every morning I do pray and say the Bible. And this sounds terribly pious, and I'm not a pious person, but every morning I pray and I go through the day with God in prayer. And I say to God, look, this is the meetings I've got. I'm going to have emails, guide me in my reply to emails, guide what comes in. Now in COVID, I say, I have a daily walk in the street. I say, I might meet people and chat to them and, just to see what. But so I just open me so that I'm there to respond if I need to in conversation. And so, in a sense, my whole life for that. Then it's a day, as you know, Christianity is day by day very much, and so each day I bring my life as a scientist to God, and what happens in that day, which is nearly all science, to God, and say, look, guide me through this day, guide me on the priorities, because Andrew, we're so busy as academic scientists, research, teaching, and administration, and there's too much to do every day. And so I say to God, let me get my priorities right this day. And so it's my science and Christianity is fundamentally integrated in that way.
You mentioned prayer. It's one of the things I've often, I wouldn't say struggle with, but it's an interesting conundrum for scientists to understand what's happening when they pray. Have you got any insights? Because I'm a great believer in prayer,
yes,
but I'm a scientist. And some people say, well, what's going on? How do you answer that?
Well, it is a good question. So, and again, it's been a gradual realization or progression on my life. So, I think one of the key things about prayer it's aligning our will with God's will, as it were. But I also think because of my science, I've thought a lot about how God normally acts in the world, and I believe that God normally acts in the world through the universe is created, and if you like, the laws is created, and he doesn't normally break them. So that's very exceptional. The resurrection I firmly believe in, when laws are broken, as it were, but that's very exceptional. And so when I pray that I will be open to chance events that day. So it's a bit like I've just said about the science. I pray for people who I know are in need. I pray for how they might be helped, but I don't normally pray for special miracles. Now I should say, if someone is sick, I would pray for them to be healed, and I have faith that God can heal them, but I balance that with a knowledge that God normally doesn't. If you see what I mean. So I think and we know this. I mean, in life, fantastic people die in their prime from cancer, and it's dreadful, and God doesn't save them, and that's the way the world is. But God can, on rare events, save that person, and I believe that. So I have faith that God can do it, but also I pray realistically in the knowledge that it may well not happen.
I remember some time ago you talking about an analogy which I found very helpful about miracles and music. I wonder if you could just very briefly retell that, because I found it really helpful.
Oh, well, thank you. Right. So, yes, so this analogy is, imagine you walk into a room and someone's playing a piano, and you go and stand behind them and you see they're playing from memories. They have no music. And you think, what are they playing? And you watch their fingers on the keys. And if every time they should play a white F, for example, they play an F sharp, and they do this every time. If I remember my music correctly, which I may not have done, then every time they, instead of playing a white note F, they play a black note F sharp. Then you can deduce they're playing in the key of G major, I believe. That may be wrong.
Correct.
Memory.
Correct.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew. Yes. So what you've done, you've reconstructed the instructions the composer gave to the pianist. And if he'd got music in front of him, and the sheet of music would have a little F sharp there against the F on the stave in the music. And so that's what scientists do. They try to reconstruct the way that God created the universe. But then, if you continue to watch the pianist's fingers, you may find that occasionally he puts in an A flat, or occasionally a C sharp. And again, if you're a musician, you'll say these are accidentals. So he hasn't followed the composer instructions, but the composer actually, if you had the music there, he'd have these instructions, but he'd occasionally put the accidentals into the music script. So he'd actually break his own rules, as it were. But because he's the composer, he's free to break his own rules. And if he's a great composer, he does it because it makes better music. And this is something when I used to play the piano a lot. And when I played the piano, I actually took a piece of great music and I played it without the accidentals, and it just sounds so much better with the accidentals.
Yeah.
And so the analogy then with God is clear that God has, springtime and harvest shall not fail, and God is a consistent God, but he is free to very occasionally break his own rules. And when he does it, it's to make better music. And so the resurrection is because if Jesus was the Son of God, then death could not hold him, as Peter says in the 2nd chapter of Acts. That's my view of miracles. So yeah.
I think that's, I mean, personally, I found that a very helpful one. And I confess that I plagiarized it on one or two occasions.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
Now, are there any areas where you've really struggled in your faith as a Christian and your following of science? Other things that you've found difficult to reconcile?
Right. So I think, initially when I was, between 16 and 20, there was a creation evolution, which I found difficult. But then I am reconciled to that. So evolution is the way which God chose to create the universe. I think I still find difficult the problem of pain and suffering. So I understand how it's happened. It's the way the world is. So in the evolutionary process, you'll get mutations, and better things will emerge, but also there's some harmful mutations. You'll get this dreadful COVID virus and so on. But it's still difficult, I think. And I just say that this is, in the end, I say this is the way the world is. And in the evolutionary process, we couldn't emerge without this possibility of bad mutations as well as good mutations. But that is, that's a slight problem to me still.
I think anybody who doesn't find that a problem doesn't really understand it, because we can provide many explanations that work at one level, but they're never complete. And when you see somebody suffering, I remember C.S. Lewis's two books, The Problem of Pain, which was in a sense the intellectual argument, and then A Grief Observed, when none of the intellectual argument really worked.
Yes, that's right. No, that is right. That is right. Yes.
But, you of course have explored different aspects of your faith in science quite a lot. You've written about how some of the events in the Bible were explained by science. How did you get into this, and what are some of the key conclusions you've come to? I know you've written a lot, so you'll have to be brief. But,
yeah, okay. So, well, I got into it when my father gave my younger daughter, and she was then like 8, in fact, a book called Great Men of Science, right? So today, I guess it'd be called Great Persons of Science, but Great Men of Science then. And it was like it wasn't a ladybird book, but like that. And each page described, it's Great Men of History, Great Men of History. Each page described a particular person. So one page for Christopher Columbus, Alexander the Great, Caesar, and one page for Jesus. And right in the front of the book, there was a sort of index of each of the people who'd have a page to them. And each of them, it said date of birth, the date of death. And with Jesus, it said born 4 BC, ? Died AD 30, ? And my daughter looked, and everyone else had a definite date. And my daughter turned to me, she said, Daddy, why do we know the date of the birth of death of everybody apart from Jesus? And I never thought about that before. And I thought that's a very good question. And it so happened that, by chance, if you like, that 2 weeks later, I was sitting in church, and it was Easter, and the story of the crucifixion was being read, and it was being read from Luke's gospel, and it was an unusual translation of Luke's gospel. I don't know what it was, but it talked about the 3 hours of darkness, and then it said, "For the sun was eclipsed." And I thought, gosh, this is amazing, because if there's an eclipse of the sun at the crucifixion, we can, we can retro-calculate eclipses. So I happen to have working with me as a research assistant doing computing, someone who's a very expert astronomer, and needs a few more months to complete his thesis. And I went to him and said, look, can we calculate, solar eclipses around the time of, visible from Jerusalem around the time of 30 AD, 33 AD? And he said, Colin, it's an impossibility. And I said, why? He said, because, and he wasn't a Christian. He said, the crucifixion was at Passover time. And at Passover time, you can't have a solar eclipse. You can only have a lunar eclipse. Because, with moons full, you can only lose it. And so he said, it's not possible. And so I then looked at the Bible to start with and found that only late versions of Luke's manuscript say the sun was eclipsed. The others say there's darkness at noon, and some say the sunlight failed. So this is almost certainly a late addition, and a wrong late addition to the text. But it got me interested, and I then got interested and said, well, how can we calculate the date of crucifixion? And so I did a paper on this, and I also found that on the evening of the crucifixion, there was a lunar eclipse visible from Jerusalem on the 3rd of April, AD 33, which is, in fact, the most likely date of the crucifixion. And Peter hints about this in his Pentecost speech, where he says the moon will return to blood, which what happens at a lunar eclipse. And there's two other early references saying that the moon was turned to blood on the evening of crucifixion. So that got me interested. And then I looked at the birth of Jesus and the Star of Bethlehem and did some work on that. And there's a comet which just fits the biblical description in Matthew chapter 2 extremely well, even to the point of, the star standing over the place where Jesus was born, because a long-tailed comet can do this. And two people, Josephus and Dio Cassius, talk about a star standing over a place, and it was a comet. And then I looked at a great puzzle, which was Joshua saying the sun stood still. And if you look at the original Hebrew, it just says the sun stopped, right? And biblical translators have assumed it means the sun stopped moving. But I said, why can't it mean the stop doing what it normally does, stop shining? And Alan Millard, a great Hebrew expert, said, yes, Colin, you're absolutely right. And so there was a solar eclipse, in fact, I suggest, at the time of Joshua when he entered Canaan. And then that's led me to believe something about the way God acts in our world, which I think is quite important. And if you go to the Bible, it says that Jesus was slain before the creation of the universe, and a couple of times in the New Testament. And what's that mean? And I think what that means is that when God created the universe, he built into it his salvation plan. So I think when the universe was created, what that verse means is that God determined before the creation that Jesus would come to a certain time and a certain place in history. And for the lunar and a solar eclipse to occur at his birth, and a lunar eclipse at his death, a star of Bethlehem at his birth, solar eclipse of Joshua, these are normal things. They're just things you can retro-calculate. They must have been built into the original Big Bang as well. So I think God has established a certain framework of events in the universe, like the coming of Jesus, probably like the coming of Moses. But within that, there's flexibility within that framework, because you have to have flexibility if prayer is going to be meaningful. And so that's really helped me. That's my view of how God acts in the world, as it were, which I think if it's true, I think it's quite important.
Yeah, that's really, and I've certainly enjoyed reading some of your accounts and hearing you talk about them. It is fascinating. And actually that brings me on to another question, because you've used your science in a way to help Christians in understanding the relationship between science and faith and scripture. But do you think that churches could make better use of their scientists as members of the congregation? And how might they do so?
I think it's a really good question. I think, we now live in a scientific age, and with COVID, the positives say we're following the scientists, and so we really live in a scientific age, and the churches haven't moved into this scientific age, most of them, and so scientists are often ignored in most of the churches. And I think the ministers really need to get them involved, and especially with the younger people in the church as they go up through school, through university. If they are Christians at a young age, they're like to throw it off at a later age because they believe in Richard Dawkins' books, for example, and so I think get the scientists involved. If they're able people, get them to preach in church on a Sunday. Get them to lead youth groups. Get them to come and give special talks to youth groups. Talk at come around to house groups and give talks. So I think we should involve the scientists more and more. I just yesterday evening I heard a talk by but I think I can name him because he's got this on the website. But his name is his Sir somebody Wall anyway, and he was a UK diplomat. And he advised Tony Blair and these people, and he was a devout Christian, and he said in this interview he read Dawkins' book The God Delusion, and he gave up his Christianity. And this was, aged about 50 or something. He did this, or 60 or something. And so Richard Dawkins had this huge effect. And I think Christians in Science has been very good at countering this, but, it has to continue to do this. And Dawkins is sort of fading away, but other people are coming up like Sam Harris, and they're very persuasive writers. And we have to take them seriously. And take what they say seriously and give counter arguments. And Christian Science is very important for that. I think Christian Science also important for helping isolated Christians. There are Christians in our universities and departments who think, there are very few Christians or scientists like them around. And we have to say that that's wrong. There's lots of people, lots of scientists who are Christians. So key role for CIS in the future. And you've done a great job as chairman, can I say, Andrew? So thank you very much.
Well, that's very kind. And I know Paul is now continuing the work, and Steph will be very excited about what you've just said, because we've been launching a sort of new emphasis on working with churches and a new video. So I'm sure what you've just said will be a great boost for that. So I was going to ask you separately about what CIS could do, but I think you've really answered that one. So what I'd like to finish with is to ask you whether you have faced any opposition for your faith in the workplace. I know that the scientific workplace can be quite difficult for Christians. Have you experienced much opposition, and how have you dealt with it?
Right. So, Andrew, I think I've been very fortunate in that I haven't really experienced any sort of direct opposition, but I do know that people talk behind your back, as it were. And I'll just tell you, so I was in Australia a few years ago at a conference, and I got an Australian, a person who's now dead, but a scientist who was a great friend of mine. And he was an atheist, right? But he was a great friend of mine and a great scientist. And someone else came up to me and he said, Colin, he said, I know you're a great friend of this person, but he said, this person was talking to me the other day, and he said, isn't it sad that Colin believes this rubbish about the Bible? It's so sad, and he's so stupid to believe it. And so I think that probably happens quite a lot to us, and we just don't know about it. But I've been lucky, so I haven't had any open opposition at all. I mean, I had this is an interesting story. So I had a new research student who was Chinese, and I told him, what his project was and what he should read in the morning. That afternoon, he knocked at my door and he said, I'm told you're a Christian, you believe in God. And I said, you sound surprised. He said, I am surprised. And I said, why? He said, in China, we're told it's impossible to believe in God if you're a scientist. Science has disproved God. And, so I said to him, would it surprise you to know there's a lot of scientists who believe in God? And he said, it's not possible. And I said, I happen to have on my bookshelf at work this book called Real Science, Real Faith, which Sam Berry edited. There's a chapter by a lot of different scientists. So I said, would you like to look at this book? So he said, yes, I very much like to. So he took away a copy of this book. So I think that also happens a lot, that, you know, people around you think what this person believes is impossible. We'll just let him get on with it, as it were. But apart from that, I've been very, very fortunate. I know a lot of people aren't, but I haven't had sort of open opposition, so I've been very fortunate.
I think some scientists, perhaps more so in the biological fields, do experience
yes,
opposition. But one of the sad things, and I don't know if you've experienced this, is that you can sometimes feel out of place in the church because there's a sort of suspicion of science in the church. Have you experienced that at all?
I know other people who've experienced this. So again, I've been quite fortunate. Or it may be that I've chosen churches that don't have that. That could well be. So you know, I've lived in lots of different places in the country. I've had different academic jobs, and although I was brought up as a Baptist, I go to Anglican churches or Methodist churches. I go to a church in which I feel at home. And so perhaps I self-selected churches which welcome scientists. That's probably the case, Andrew. But other people... I think that is. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Colin, I've got to the end of all the things I wanted to ask you. It's been really fascinating. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we end this interview?
No, I think I'd just like to say thank you to the people who are involved in my life and guiding me. And it's just, you know, the scientific adventure life is a wonderful life, and the Christian life is also. We both seek us after truth. The life is an adventure, and we should be so grateful to God, I think, that we're scientists and able to, in our work, explore His wonderful creation. So you know, we should be so grateful to God for that, and thank God for our wonderful lives we have, both as scientists and as Christians.
I fully agree. And on that very positive note, Colin, thank you very much for spending this time with us.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.